Today, two women who were, as they say, in the room where it happened are providing critical new details about the dangerous state of U.S.-Russia relations during the last administration, brought on by what can only be described as fawning on the part of Donald Trump toward Vladimir Putin. In an essay published in Foreign Affairs, adapted from her new book, Fiona Hill, a former top aide in the White House on Russia and Europe, reveals this, quote, all of Putin's machinations greatly impressed Trump. He wanted to get along with Russia and with Putin personally. Practically the only thing Trump ever said to me during my time in the administration was to ask in reference to Putin, am I going to like him? Before I could answer, the other officials in the room got up to leave, and the president's attention shifted. Such was life as a female advisor in the Trump White House. And then there's Stephanie Grisham. She's a senior official in the administration who makes clear in her new book that attempts to look tough on Russia were all an act. Reflecting on a bilateral meeting in Osaka back in 2019, Grisham writes this, quote, with all the talk of sanctions against Russia for interfering in the 2016 election and for various human rights abuses, Trump told Putin, okay, I'm going to act a little tougher with you for a few minutes, but it's for the cameras. And after they leave, we'll talk. You understand. Fiona Hill was actually present for that meeting, and Grisham describes it this way, quote, as the meeting began, Hill leaned over and asked me if I had noticed Putin's translator. It was a very attractive brunette woman with long hair, a pretty face, and a wonderful figure. She proceeded to tell me that she suspected the woman had been selected by Putin specifically to distract our president. Joining our conversation is Charlie Sykes, editor-at-large for The Bulwark and MSNBC contributor. Jeremy Bash is still here. Jeremy, first, your reaction to what we're hearing from Fiona Hill and Stephanie Grisham.
Boy, you're getting a little racy in the 5 o'clock hour, Nicole. Look,
it's
I think with respect to the national security, hey, exactly, it's happy hour. And I think with respect to the national security implications, I think this is more evidence, as if any were needed, that the Trump administration, but Donald Trump in particular, was extraordinarily weak in the face of Putin's aggression. Trump undermined our allies in NATO. He slobbered all over Vladimir Putin. He publicly said in Helsinki that he believed Putin's descriptions of election interference over our own intelligence community's descriptions. And look, all the while, Putin was developing hypersonic weapons. He was imprisoning opposition figures. He was poisoning potential spies who would help the West. And what did the Trump administration do? They slow-rolled sanctions against the Kremlin. So all the while, Putin was having his way with Trump, and I think there were real consequences, Nicole. I mean, it wasn't just about the U.S. and the Trump administration. It was about democracy itself. And Putin's vision, his vision to undermine democracy, was achieved between 2016 and 2020 in ways that I think only historians will help us understand in hindsight.
Well, I hear you, but I mean, before the historians sort of get that full picture down, the current president has to deal with the damage that was done. And I wonder if you can just say a little more, Jeremy, about how, and it's not just an asymmetry. I mean, Putin would rob you if you were hiding your wallet. Trump took it out and opened it up and handed it to him and was like, what else can I put in here? I mean, how much ground did Putin gain on us because of Trump's subservience and worship of him?
A tremendous amount of ground. And I think after the 2016 election, after Russia clearly interfered to benefit Donald Trump, and our intelligence community called the Kremlin out on this, and Trump worked the entire 4 years of his presidency to undermine the intelligence community and our entire national security apparatus's effort to push back on Russia, its disinformation, its hybrid warfare, its asymmetric threats against us and democracy writ large in Europe and around the world. I think Putin felt he had the upper hand, but when President Biden came in, I think the Kremlin realized the party's over, and what you saw in Europe earlier this year when the president went to Europe, met with our allies, rallied the world's democracies to not only fight COVID, but to stand up for democratic values and to push back on the autocratic norms that the Kremlin has been advancing. And then the president sat down with Kremlin and called them out on cyber attacks, ransomware, and SolarWinds, and all the things that have been dominating the headlines in 2021. I think Putin knows that the party's over and that he's got a very tough opponent in Joe Biden in the Oval Office.
You know, Charlie Sykes, this is where where Donald Trump leaving the stage still doesn't help the United States of America or our national security. And this is where I guess you have beat some understanding into me about why the Republicans roll over and die with the insurrection and the rolling back of our democratic norms. But this, Russia, I mean, having worked for John McCain, I find it galling that in Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy, you have two Republican leaders totally indifferent to Russian aggression and what Jeremy's describing, Putin gaining so much ground in the United States of America because of Donald Trump. Why don't they care?
Well, by the way, I have two reactions to these books before I address your question, which is, I'm glad we're learning the confirmation of things that we actually already knew. But I continue to be frustrated by all of the people who were in the room who did not speak out when it really mattered. Stephanie Grisham being one. You talk about John Bolton, Mick Mulvaney, John Kelly, General McMaster, General Mattis, all of these folks who knew what Donald Trump was and how he was behaving, and yet chose not to share that with the American people before the election. But having said that, Fiona Hill's essay is really important, and the point she makes, I think, is not just that Donald Trump had this weird man crush on Vladimir Putin, but he also shared his worldview. They actually shared this illiberal contempt for democratic norms. And she describes the way that America and Russia have kind of coalesced, how there's been a convergence of our political styles, and the way in which Trump has helped import the kind of chaotic politics that Putin thrived on. And so you're right. Simply removing Donald Trump from the White House hasn't changed that, because what's happened is that Putin's style of politics has infected the American body politic, and we're left to deal with that. And, Fiona Hill's book basically describes our polarization, by the way, as a serious national security issue. I mean, she makes that point very, very explicitly, that is now the national security, is the polarization that the enemy is now within.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie, I want to address both your points, because on the first, I agree. And I think we'll make a graphic and put up on the list all the people who would have been fantastic to hear from. And speaking of racy, I mean, Stephanie Grisham goes there, all the way there. But I think on the question about Russians' attack on this country, it was to sow division. The success of the fact that what Rudy Giuliani was peddling was Russian disinformation, where Rudy Giuliani was peddling stuff from Russian-backed Ukrainians. I mean, the infection and the infiltration and the lines between Ron Johnson's political attacks against Biden and Russian disinformation were erased. And I guess my question for you, Charlie, is, can you put the genie back in the bottle, or are we done now? Have we just blurred all the lines between Russia's national security objective, which is to attack and divide and weaken us, and what Republicans will gleefully peddle?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not as optimistic as I would like to be, but Vladimir Putin's return on investment has been fantastic, far more than anything he could have possibly imagined. In 2016, we thought that there were bots. We thought there was disinformation. Whatever Russia did back in 2016 has been overwhelmed by our domestic industry of disinformation and division. So I don't know how we can put that back in the bottle. And all of this has happened in broad daylight. That we know that the president's attorney, we know that U.S. Senators, like my own senior senator from Wisconsin, have been peddling Russian disinformation. And yet, among Republicans, you bring up Russia, and they're going to say that it was all a hoax. So no amount of information, no reports from Bob Mueller, no reports from Fiona Hill are actually going to serve as a reality check on this continuing delusion.